The sky was still a bright blue as I turned the key in the lock, a grin spreading across my face. I was looking forward to the surprise, a little pre-birthday party for Rachel that I'd planned. I had taken the afternoon off work to set everything up, hoping to create a memorable day for her. The door swung open, and I was immediately hit with the sound of music thumping from inside. I had expected to walk into a quiet, romantic setting, but instead, the bass of an upbeat dance track vibrated through the floorboards. I paused, puzzled, and took a deep breath to calm the sudden spike of nerves. As I pushed the door open wider, I saw that the living room was bathed in a warm glow from fairy lights strung up across the room. The sight that met me was nothing short of surreal. Rachel, my Rachel, was dancing almost naked in the middle of the room, her body moving rhythmically to the music. She wore only a sheer robe that barely covered her, and in her arms was a man I didn't recognize. Around them, a group of friends cheered and clapped, completely oblivious to my presence. My heart pounded painfully against my chest. I stood frozen, the bouquet of lilies and box of chocolates feeling like dead weight in my hands. The joy I had anticipated evaporated, replaced by a numbing disbelief. Rachel's laughter was cut short when she noticed me. Her face turned pale, and she stumbled away from the man, her eyes widening in shock. "Jason," she cried out, her voice a mixture of panic and guilt. She took a hesitant step towards me, but the look on my face must have stopped her in her tracks. "Jason, she began, but the words faltered, caught in her throat. The room's lively chatter had turned to hushed whispers as the realization of my presence sunk in. I felt a surge of anger so intense that it was almost physical. My mind raced through a tumult of emotions, and I clenched my jaw to keep from shouting. "I didn't expect to find this," I said coldly, my voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I was coming home to celebrate." Rachel's eyes filled with tears. "Please, let me explain. This isn't what it looks like." "Save it," I cut her off, my voice sharp and tinged with hurt. "I don't want to hear your excuses right now." I turned on my heel, the bouquet and chocolates slipping from my grasp as I walked out the door. The cool evening air hit my face as I stumbled to my car, my hands shaking. I wanted to scream, to lash out, but instead, I found myself driving aimlessly, the streets blurring past as I tried to make sense of what I had just witnessed. As I pulled over to the side of the road, my phone buzzed with a call from Rachel. I ignored it, my mind a whirlwind of pain and betrayal. It wasn't just the sight of her with another man that hurt, it was the realization that the life I had thought was secure and happy was, in reality, built on a foundation of lies. In that moment, I knew I had to figure out what to do next. I couldn't just let this go. The image of Rachel in that compromising position haunted me as I made my way to Mark Sullivan's office, desperate for answers and a way to confront the painful reality I had stumbled upon. The dim light of Mark Sullivan's office was a stark contrast to the vivid turmoil I felt inside. I had barely managed to hold myself together as I recounted the events of that fateful night. Mark sat across from me, his expression a mix of sympathy and professional curiosity. "So, let me get this straight," Mark said, tapping his pen against his notebook. "You walked in on your wife, Rachel, almost naked, dancing with another man, and you want to take action?" "Yes," I replied, my voice cold. "I'm done with just sitting around. I want her to feel the pain I'm feeling right now." Mark nodded thoughtfully. "All right, we can do that. But before we dive into revenge, let's take stock of what we have. Any evidence or leads on this guy she was with? Any indication that this isn't a one-time thing?" I pulled out my phone and showed him the photos I'd taken, grainy, but clear enough to make out the scene. I didn't think to take much else. I was too shocked. Mark examined the images and then leaned back in his chair. "We can work with this. But if we're going to go public, we need solid evidence. Something that proves this isn't an isolated incident and shows a pattern of behavior." Over the next few days, Mark and I worked tirelessly. We tracked down the man from the party, identified as Daniel Harcourt, and discovered that he had a history of similar affairs. We gathered messages and photographs that Rachel had exchanged with him, as well as with other individuals. It wasn't just about the affair anymore, it was about making sure everyone knew the full extent of her infidelity. Finally, the day of the charity gala arrived. It was a high-profile event, a chance to make a statement. Mark and I had arranged for the incriminating evidence to be displayed during a key moment of the evening. I felt a mix of dread and anticipation as I prepared to confront Rachel and the guests. At the gala, the opulent surroundings felt almost surreal. The grand ballroom was adorned with glittering decorations, and guests mingled with glasses of champagne in hand. I watched from a corner, my stomach a knot of anxiety and excitement. When the time came, Mark signaled to the technician who was responsible for the presentation. The room's lights dimmed, and the projector screen flickered to life. Images of Rachel with various men filled the screen, accompanied by text messages and photos that left nothing to the imagination. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd, and I could see Rachel's face ashen with shock and humiliation. I approached her as she stood frozen, her eyes wide with tears. "Jason, she began, but her voice was lost in the noise of the crowd. "Rachel," I said, my voice steady but filled with an underlying anger, "I thought it was time you faced the consequences of your actions. You've hurt me in a way I never thought possible." Rachel reached out, her hand trembling. "Please, Jason, don't do this. I'm so sorry. I made a mistake, but this isn't how I wanted it to end." "It's too late for apologies," I replied firmly. "You've made your choices, and now everyone knows." As I walked away from the scene, I could hear Rachel's sobs and the murmurs of the crowd around me. The sense of satisfaction I had anticipated was nowhere to be found. Instead, a hollow emptiness settled in my chest, and I felt the weight of what I had done. Mark joined me outside the ballroom, his face a mix of satisfaction and concern. "You did what you set out to do. How are you feeling?" I shook my head, my thoughts a whirlwind. "I thought this would make me feel better, but it doesn't. It's not worth it." Mark clapped a hand on my shoulder, offering a sympathetic look. "Sometimes revenge doesn't bring the closure we expect. But you'll have to deal with this however you can. The next steps are up to you." As the night went on, the initial rush of revenge faded, leaving me with a deep sense of regret. I had achieved what I set out to do, but the cost was far greater than I had anticipated. The days following the gala were a blur of anger, regret, and confusion. I had exposed Rachel, publicly humiliated her, and for what? The satisfaction I had sought had never come. Instead, I felt empty, like I had crossed a line I could never uncross. I avoided her calls, ignored her texts, and isolated myself from everything. I needed space. That was, until I heard the knock on my door. I opened it to find Rachel standing there, her face pale and drawn. Her eyes were swollen, dark circles beneath them like she hadn't slept in days. She looked like a shadow of the woman I had married. "Jason," she began, her voice shaky but determined. "We need to talk." I crossed my arms, standing rigid in the doorway. What could you possibly have to say after all of this? Her gaze dropped to the floor, and for a moment, she didn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but firm. "It's not what you think. None of this is what you think." I scoffed, turning away from her, but she stepped inside, shutting the door behind her. "Jason, please," she said, her voice cracking. "Just hear me out. I know you're angry, and you have every right to be, but this is more complicated than it looks." I could feel my anger boiling beneath the surface. "More complicated?" I shot back, my voice rising. "I walked into our home and found you half naked with another man, Rachel. Then I find out that wasn't the first time. So, please enlighten me, how exactly is this more complicated?" Her eyes filled with tears, but she held my gaze. "Because I didn't plan any of this. Because my sister, Laura, set me up." I blinked, caught off guard. "What are you talking about?" Rachel took a shaky breath and sat down on the edge of the couch, looking so fragile that for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. "It was Laura," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "She found out about Daniel, about the one time I messed up. She blackmailed me. She's been pulling the strings behind the scenes for months." I frowned, trying to process her words. "Laura? Why would she do that?" Rachel let out a bitter laugh, wiping a tear from her cheek. "Because she's jealous. She always has been. Ever since we were kids, she's hated me for having the things she didn't. A good marriage, a stable life. She was always the one who got into trouble, while I had everything. When she found out about Daniel, she saw her chance to ruin me." My anger wavered as I stared at her. This wasn't the narrative I had expected. Laura, Rachel's sister, had always been difficult, sharp-tongued and distant, but I never imagined she could be so vindictive. "I don't understand," I muttered, sitting down across from Rachel. "Why didn't you tell me any of this before? Why didn't you come to me?" Rachel shook her head, her eyes filling with fresh tears. "Because I was ashamed. I didn't want you to know what I'd done. Laura threatened to destroy my life if I didn't keep quiet, and I was terrified that you'd leave me if you found out. I thought I could handle it, but I was wrong." I sat back, the weight of her words settling in. The pieces started to fall into place, and a deep sense of regret washed over me. "So, the party, the man I saw you with, Laura arranged that, too," Rachel said, her voice trembling. "She made it all happen. I didn't know what was going on until it was too late. She manipulated everything." I was silent for a long moment, processing the revelations. The anger I had been holding onto so tightly began to slip away, replaced by a hollow, aching guilt. I had let my own rage consume me to the point where I hadn't stopped to ask questions, to consider that maybe there was more to the story. "You should have told me," I said finally, my voice soft but pained. Rachel nodded, her eyes brimming with regret. "I know. I should have. But I didn't want to lose you. I thought I could fix everything before it spiraled out of control. But then you humiliated me at the gala, and everything fell apart." My heart sank as I thought back to that night, the look on her face as the images flashed across the screen, the gasps of the crowd, her utter devastation. I had wanted to hurt her, to make her feel the pain I had felt, and now I could see that I had been a pawn in a much larger game. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees, my head in my hands. "I'm sorry, Rachel. God, I don't know what I was thinking. I was so angry." Rachel's voice was soft, barely a whisper. "I know." We sat in silence for a long time, the weight of everything we had done hanging heavy between us. My mind raced as I tried to reconcile the damage that had been done, not just by Rachel, or Laura, but by me. The revenge I had sought hadn't just hurt Rachel. It had hurt us both. Finally, I looked up at her, the regret clear in my voice. "What do we do now?" Rachel wiped her eyes and gave a small, sad smile. "I don't know, Jason. I don't know if we can fix this. But I want to try, if you do." The room was quiet, the air thick with unresolved pain and unspoken apologies. As I stared into her tear-streaked face, I realized that the path ahead wouldn't be easy. But maybe, just maybe, it was one worth walking together. The first few weeks after our conversation were filled with a heavy silence. Rachel and I had agreed to try, but that didn't mean we knew how to begin. We tiptoed around each other, both aware of the chasm that lay between us. Every look, every word felt weighed down by the past. Still, something had shifted, there was a willingness to move forward, even if neither of us was quite sure what that meant yet. It was during one of those quiet, tense dinners that I finally broke the silence. "Rachel," I said, pushing my half-eaten plate aside. "I think we need help. We can't keep pretending like everything's fine. We can't just sweep this under the rug." She looked up from her plate, her expression soft but guarded. "I know. I've been thinking the same thing." She paused, her voice dropping. "Do you want to go to counseling?" I hadn't even realized how badly I needed to hear that suggestion until she said it. Yeah, I said, nodding. I think it's the only way we'll have a shot at fixing this. Rachel let out a sigh, almost as if she had been holding her breath, waiting for my agreement. Okay. I'll make an appointment. The first session felt like an interrogation. We sat across from each other in stiff chairs, the therapist, Martha, a soft-spoken woman in her 50s, guiding us through awkward introductions and ground rules. Let's start with something simple, Martha said, glancing between us. Why are you here? I looked at Rachel, hoping she would speak first. She took a deep breath, her hands ringing nervously in her lap. We're here because I hurt Jason. And I lied to him. Her voice was fragile, but honest. I didn't tell him the truth about everything, and it led to all of this. I don't want to lose him, but I don't know how to fix it. I nodded slowly, feeling the knot in my chest tighten as she spoke. And I'm here because I hurt Rachel too, I said, the words heavy in my mouth. I let my anger drive me to do something unforgivable. I humiliated her. I thought revenge would make me feel better, but it only made things worse. Martha listened quietly, her hands resting on her notebook. It sounds like both of you are holding on to a lot of pain and guilt, she said gently. What we need to focus on now is rebuilding trust, if that's what you both want. Rachel looked at me, her eyes filled with hope and uncertainty. I do want that, Jason. But I'm scared. I don't know if you'll ever be able to forgive me. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. I want to forgive you, Rachel. I do. But it's not going to happen overnight. We have a lot to work through. The sessions that followed were difficult, sometimes gut-wrenching. We dug deep into the reasons behind Rachel's infidelity and my choice to seek revenge. There were tears, accusations, moments when one of us would storm out of the room, only to come back and apologize. But slowly, something began to change. The anger that had once burned so brightly between us started to dim, replaced by understanding, empathy, and a desire to heal. One evening, after a particularly emotional session, Rachel and I found ourselves sitting in the car outside the therapist's office, neither of us wanting to leave just yet. Do you think we'll ever be okay again? She asked, her voice small, almost lost. I turned to look at her, really look at her, for what felt like the first time in a long while. I don't know, I said honestly. But I think we're getting there. Slowly, she reached out, her fingers brushing against mine. It was the first time we'd touched in weeks, and the gesture, as small as it was, felt monumental. I took her hand, squeezing it gently. I miss us, Rachel whispered, her eyes filling with tears. I miss how things used to be. I nodded, feeling a lump form in my throat. I miss us too. But maybe we can build something new. Something better. Rachel looked at me, her expression a mixture of hope and fear. Do you really think so? I do, I said, squeezing her hand again. But it's going to take time. We're going to have to be patient, with each other and with ourselves. Over the next few months, Rachel and I worked hard to rebuild the trust we had lost. Counseling became a regular part of our lives, and we both committed to being open and honest about our feelings, no matter how uncomfortable it made us. We started doing little things together again. Cooking dinner, watching movies, going for walks. The intimacy was slow to return, but it was there, gradually. We had to learn to talk to each other without the filter of anger and suspicion, to listen without jumping to conclusions. One night, as we sat on the porch after dinner, Rachel turned to me, her voice quiet. I think I'm starting to forgive myself. I looked at her, surprised. What do you mean? She sighed, staring out into the darkening sky. I've been carrying so much guilt for what I did. For hurting you. For letting Laura manipulate me. But now, after everything we've been through, I'm starting to see that I'm not just the mistakes I made. I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. I get it. I think I'm starting to forgive you too. It's not easy, but I want to. And I'm working on forgiving myself for what I did as well. Rachel looked at me, her eyes shining with emotion. I love you, Jason. I never stopped. I love you too, I replied, the words feeling raw and real, like I was saying them for the first time. And I think, if we keep working at this, we're going to make it. She smiled, a real smile, and leaned into me, resting her head on my shoulder. For the first time in what felt like forever, the future didn't seem so daunting. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours, imperfect, messy, but filled with the possibility of something better. And for the first time since that night I had walked into our living room and found my world turned upside down, I believed that maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to each other.